All right, welcome to your Tuesday. Halifax Regional Council considering closing the Cogswell Park designated encampment. This story in the Chronicle Herald this morning with a 25-story seniors development set to open its doors on Quinpool Road. It's time to close the park homeless encampment nearby, argues the area's councillor, Councillor Virginia Hinch, who was on the show yesterday. Brought a motion to Halifax Regional Council last week to look at closing the encampment on Cogswell Park, the triangle of grass between Windsor Parker and Wellsford Streets. It's one of 4 designated encampments left after the municipality shut down the Gary Street site in Dartmouth on June 25th. And the councillor says residents and passerby have witnessed ongoing criminal activity, including drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, prostitution, theft, and tent fires. She said, adding that she has a petition of 130 names on it or close to it. And the encampment was designated, of course, in July of 2024 with an occupancy of 8 tents. There are now 23. So one of the questions that I'm going to ask you is why is it that this type of activity is allowed to go basically unchecked now at these encampments? I mean, pretty serious things, hard drugs. Not just talking about people smoking the odd joint, the odd cannabis joint. We're talking about hard drugs, folks. Needles all over the place. And obviously drug dealing is going on, and domestic violence, prostitution. I mean, at some point, does law enforcement not have some role in dealing with this? Now, the argument, of course, could be made that what are they going to do? If they start enforcing and going in and making arrests, then where does it end, and what's the end result of and of course the court system would be overburdened. It already is overburdened. And do you incarcerate everybody? And we know that our jails are overtaxed as well. So there are no easy answers, but for the people in the surrounding areas that live around these encampments, I just can't imagine what I would be going through if I had a property, and in particular if you wanted to sell a property and you were in the vicinity of one of these encampments. I mean, your property value would be almost worthless. Is that fair, folks, to taxpayers and people who live in that area? And I understand there are nuances here of people who are homeless, and look, I understand that this could happen to anybody. I get it. I do. I empathize and sympathize. I truly do. But I also empathize and sympathize with the people who live around these encampments. And I would dare say that probably a member of council would not vote to have encampments if, in fact, their property value were impacted by one of these. Now, I don't know if any members of council live in the shadows of an encampment. I'm sure that perhaps maybe some do. I don't know. But this is something that I want to get your feedback on when it comes to encampments here, because this is a pretty serious thing that's impacting the city and the property owners and the businesses as well, folks. The businesses that are impacted by this. So just one of the things that you can get to when we open the phone lines in about an hour's time. And of course, this yesterday, a caller brought it up, and I thought it would be worthy of discussing a little deeper. The Conservatives want Prime Minister Mark Carney to sell all the assets of his blind trust to avoid any possible conflicts of interest. Carney set up the blind trust after he was sworn in as Prime Minister in March, and the details of how it works were made public on Friday. They show that the Prime Minister has set up screens to avoid potential conflicts related to his previous interest in Brookfield Asset Management, Brookfield Corporation, and Stripe Inc. Folks, the Prime Minister is loaded. This guy's got all kinds of bucks. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in assets in these companies. And the question, Pierre Poilievre is saying, look, he should have had to sold all of these and turn them into cash and then hand that over to a trustee, and the blind trust would be built from there, and he would have no clue from there what was going on. That's a far cry from what actually has happened. Whereas he basically said, these are my assets. He handed them over intact and set up a screen so that he's not aware of how they're being managed. That's a far cry from what Pierre Poilievre is asking for. And the question that I'm asking, is it reasonable to have somebody divest to that degree in order to serve publicly? Because that could be a major disincentive for somebody to want to serve in public life if they had to divest their holdings in that way. So it fundamentally, do you trust Mark Carney to operate ethically when it comes to decisions? And do you agree with Pierre Poilievre? Should he be forced to sell all of his assets and turn it into cash? Some of the things that you can talk about. I'd like to thank Vanessa Van Ness, of course, on the other side of the glass. The control board's doing a fine job as always. And again, hope to hear from many of you in about an hour's time. Now joining me here in studio is Robert Huish, Associate Professor, Dalhousie University, Department of International Development Studies. Robert, thanks for joining the show, my friend.
Good morning, Todd. Good to see you.
Well, what do you think of some of those issues that I just brought up?
Oh man, it's never dull in the summer, I suppose. And I guess the last one, Mr. Carney, he's got an incredible CV.
Yeah, he sure does.
Underneath him, and managing Brookfield, that was one of the most top performers on the Toronto Stock Exchange for years. But he's also done other things abroad, with being the exchequer in Britain, and serving the British government, and then under Harper's government as well. So I think, currently, if he's able to truly say, no, I'm taking on the job as the PM, and, whatever funds I've accumulated, keep it out of my way, if it's in cash or bonds, or if it's still in stocks, as long as that's not guiding Canadian policy the way that, Brian Mulroney did with the Airbus scandal way back when, then you're ahead of the game. And I wonder what Mr. Poilievre's reasoning is for that. Does he think that somehow you're going to get better policy by having a prime minister who's got all his assets in cash? It's a questionable thing. And I like your point, Todd, that if you start putting that kind of pressure on PMs or even members of parliament, there's already a lot of disincentive for a lot of good people to get into politics, and that would be just another one on top of it.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Because that's a lot of to divest the millions and millions of dollars into known entities, things that you built in his entire career, and then to say, turn that into cash. Good luck with that, trustee. That's a lot of faith to have in somebody, right?
Yeah, and I mean, like, if you're going to ask people to just completely divest, well, where are you going to stop? Like, are you going to ask the Canadian Pension Plan to divest in Brookfield Management? Yeah. No, they probably got shares of it. That's probably doing very well.
And there would be tax implications. You would have to, I would think,
yes,
massive tax implications on the gains.
That would hurt. That would deeply hurt.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's a midsummer posturing from Mr. Poilievre, who's I think wanting to get a seat so he can keep his pension building as a member of Parliament. So there's a lot of mud that could be slung in both directions, I guess.
And I suppose ostensibly you could say that Brookfield could benefit and would benefit from modular housing and from heat pumps and whatever. But I mean, is that enough reason to force the Prime Minister to divest?
This is something that comes up both in academia, politics, but I guess also in the corporate sector, is that, like, what is a real conflict of interest? And a conflict of interest means, in a sense, that you have your primary responsibility. So Carney's role right now is to be the Prime Minister and have all Canadians, those who voted for him and who didn't vote for him, their interests in mind. Now, if you have a secondary interest, which under the freedom of Canada you can have your secondary interest, you have a third interest, but if those secondary and third interests start to supersede the responsibility of your first interest, that's a problem, right? Like, respectively. So when I teach at Dalhousie to 400 students, if I write a terrible book and I make every one of those students in my first year class buy it, and I profit from it, that's my secondary interest coming over my primary interest in that way. So as long as that ethics barrier is there, I think we can get back to business as usual.
And of course, the other point would be that the electorate knew that Carney had these assets. It's not as if it was a mystery or it was hidden.
They rewarded him for it.
That's right.
They're like, look what this guy can do. He got two countries out of a bad way financially, and then took the companies that he was managing to top tier performers in the TSX. So that's sort of the part of that big grace that I think Canadians are giving Mr. Carney right now. There is some rumor on the horizon that there will be some austerity measures put onto the federal government, and in particular, where that's going to focus is on property holdings. So I think that's going to be the easiest way for Mr. Carney to try to get rid of some public expenditures by releasing properties that the Canadian government owns. Mr. Harper did that back in his tenure with foreign embassies and residences. He sold that off, and the money went into the public good. But now we're talking about some more austerity with the federal government, and this is where people are going to start to get grumpy when if there's going to be a reduction in public spending. Is that going to be on programs? Is it going to be on assets, or is it going to be on people? So that's maybe where people will start to actually bring some real counter critiques to what his visions are.
I think everybody knows, though, that there's all kinds of largesse in the public sector, though. I mean, no personal shot at anybody who works in the public sector. We all know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, there's a lot to that going on, right? Sure.
I mean, that's the thing that we've seen a lot of public sector institutions become very, quote unquote, inefficient. To try to purchase, goods, if it's going to be a ship, if it's going to be a new building, whatever, how many layers of committee meetings need to be involved to do simple acquisition of assets? Private sector does that pretty slick and quick when it has to. Maybe not always ethically, maybe there's some challenges with it, but yeah, that's sort of the balance. When you have a publicly accountable public service, you are going to have a lot of layers of bureaucracy in there to try to create that accountability, but at the same time, you're going to get those inefficiencies too. Okay, I want to get to the tariff situation, and Prime Minister Mark Carney meeting with his cabinet today to talk about this. So this July 21st thing, that's been blown out of the water, has it? It's not looking good. And, it's one thing to try to hear where Trump's voices are coming off of and echoing. So we heard that Trump wanted to put 35% tariffs across the board for Canada because the fentanyl was still pouring into the United States. And we know that is not true, right. That there's been adjustments by Canadian Border Services, the RCMP. There's been a task force assigned to look at if there's any domestic fentanyl produced in Canada that was going to the States. So the pressure's up. The volume was never to the point that Trump was trying to make. And if anything, in the last 6 months, it's been harnessed down quite a bit. He used the same claim against Mexico, saying it's still pouring in from Mexico. And there he served Mexico with 30% tariffs across the board. He's also putting 30% on the EU. So all these beautiful letters that went out to all these heads of state are all putting the tariff range around 30 to 35%. So a lot of them are really high. And again, it's going to be one of these situations where we see that if this goes in effect, the consequences to the U.S. economy will be swift and quick. So just reminding folks that of the 50 U.S. states, 38 of the 50, the primary trading partner is Canada. So now if you're going to make everything 35% more expensive, it doesn't matter if you are in a red state or a blue state. You are going to feel it somewhere, everywhere. Likewise, the states that have primary trading with Mexico, so it's California, Arizona, New Mexico, they're going to feel 30%. The European Union, that's states like Delaware, for example, Colorado, that's the principal trading partners of the EU there. So they're going to feel it. So no one is really going to get out of this. And I don't think he's figured out that this is going to backfire. When those Trump tariff deadlines come close, markets take a dive. The roller coaster effect comes back in. He likes the chaos. He tries to think that he's actually creating this masterpiece of global economics. And, well, he might consider himself to be Michelangelo, but, man, he's using a box of Crayolas to get this done. All right. So it says that that the new tariffs would not apply to goods that are compliant with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement on trade. So that would be, I would think, a pretty big basket of goods, would it not? It would, but always subject to change. And don't forget that some of those goods require other goods to get them to market. So we can't really avoid, the dependency that we've built on trade with the United States. Just geography makes that a reality. We've seen some of the industries already in Ontario trying to retool and dye some of their shops to try to pivot away from producing high quality aluminum and to maybe other goods, but that takes time. And the big question right now is still, and there's a lot of distortion on this, is the automakers. Are they really going to come in and start setting up factories and plants stateside which is a 20 to 30-year commitment, if there's such volatility to the tariffs that Trump's putting in place? I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of opportunity to say, look at the plants that have been established in Ontario, some manufacturing in Quebec as well, that could be put to a new manufacturer. I mean, what's wrong with some European companies coming in and setting up some of those plants if really the big three want to return to the U.S., or Japanese automakers are saying, no, we're going to go stateside now. So there's lots of room for confusion on this.
I think when it comes to the public, and there's some severe tariff fatigue when it comes to the conversation in general.
Oh, we're all nauseated.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
it's up, it's down, and what's tariff this week, what's not, and to think about those who are in the transport and export business, keeping up with that is absolutely chaotic. We're starting to see now some of the effects at the grocery stores, right? So coffee's up in price, orange juice is up in price, these sorts of things. More to come in certain goods and commodities, but really, the thing we also have to remember is that the sort of buy Canadian trend that we've seen take place has had an impact. It is making an impact on the U.S. side, tourism as well. So if you go down to the state of New Jersey, the Jersey Shore, sort of Atlantic City all the way down to Ocean City, or even down to the southern part, Wildwood, that's usually dominated by Canadian license plates this time of year. You could fire a cannon through the boardwalk. Yeah. No one's there. Yeah. And this is also hurting the American economy in that way. The amount of reduction in just people coming into the U.S. from Canada is having a multi-billion-dollar effect on the U.S. economy. Like, that's when we go down as tourists, we all spend, and the impact is huge on these businesses, and they're not feeling it. They're not seeing it. So this sort of punishing tariffs, I mean, you're not going to dissuade the American people or the Canadian people to somehow find a solution to them right away. You're going to have economic hurt, and the thing Trump forgets, it's going to be on his own people.
Robert, there were some other things I wanted to get to, but we ran out of time because it's such an interesting, compelling chat about everything else.
I'll just have to come back and see you again.
Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Todd.
All right, Robert Huish, Dalhousie University. We will be right back. All right, an open letter sent to the Premier, Tim Houston, from the Advocates for the Care of the Elderly about abused nursing home residents. Joining me to talk about all of this, there are a couple of guests from the ACE team. Carol Macomber, the ACE team's Protection of Persons in Care Review Committee Chair. Carol, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Susan Charlton, the ACE team's Protection for Persons in Care Review Committee as well. Susan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so I guess Carol or Susan, whichever would best, I guess, kind of encapsulate what the letter was about, please do so. I'll leave it up to either one of you to jump in and do that.
Oh, I'll take a stab at that, and then Susan can talk about the legislation.
Okay.
So thank you. What we outlined in the letter was that abuse rates in nursing homes have tripled over the last 10 years, while the rate of investigations of abuse has been cut in half. So we're seeing a lot more abuse and fewer investigations. And while this is happening, there doesn't seem to be anyone accountable for it. Well, first of all, let me say, when I talk about abuse, it's not someone who was left late for lunch for a few days. It's horrific abuses. People left screaming in pain for days and asking for help and having their door shut, pushed to the floor by a staff person, and confirmed cause of death was the fall and no police called. The staff was fired and can go work at another facility. Medical neglect, obvious medical neglect resulting in death. It's not small things, and yet nobody's doing anything about it. They're neglecting to implement their act. They have the ability, the Protection of Persons in Care has the ability to fine the abusers, the corporations, and the individuals. Their act was passed in 2004. They've never fined anyone. And the act is just weak overall. And the police and protection from persons in care don't even seem to have role clarity on who's responsible to stop the abuse in our findings. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, Susan, tell us what are the holes in the legislation here? Why is this happening?
Well, there's like Carol said, our act, it has no teeth. It's not robust enough. I did a comparison of all of the protection and care acts across Canada, each province, and compared it to Nova Scotia, and found Nova Scotia quite lacking. We have, there's, like Carol said, there's no discernible consequences for offenders. Our fines are very small and not implemented, whereas other fines in other provinces are much higher, especially for repeat offenders. We have, there's nothing. We have very slow response. In my personal opinion, I had very slow response from the Protection of Persons in Care office, who investigated my dad's case, and it took months and months and months. The policies they were supposed to follow were not followed in our case. We weren't interviewed formally or supported, and there's nothing in the legislation that says family members must be, or substitute decision makers must be interviewed, and that's a gap there as well. The investigators do not have to have a professional designation, such as a social worker or a nurse, as in other provinces where they do. And so that leaves, we also don't have a recourse for an appeal process. If we're not happy, if our testimony has not been heard, or we feel that the investigation was not fair, there's no process to appeal that, as there is in other provinces. So we need this act to not only be looked at by our politicians and changed and updated, but we also need the implementation of it to be seriously considered in regards to these cases where people did not get heard or felt heard, as in specifically in my case.
All right.
Yeah.
Carol, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's a really important point about the implementation, the Protection for Persons in Care provincial business unit. They have no public accountability, which is extremely poor governance for a protective service. So how can you trust a protective service that has no public accountability? They can throw out our complaints. They can refuse to investigate them, as we see they are doing. And they're the ones who have said, abuse doesn't contravene the act. Only failure to report abuse contravenes the act. Well, that makes no sense at all, and I've got a lawyer's opinion agreeing with me. But aside from that, failure to provide or to report is the only thing that contravenes the act. Well, in my case, the director is saying that the Shanx facility where my mother was abused did report, when in fact the documentation says they didn't. But nobody's accountable. So anyone can do whatever they want, including, it appears, to manslaughter, and nothing is happening. And it's all just okay with people.
Why do you think that is? Why is there this indifference over this whole issue?
It's invisible. Nobody sees it.
Yeah.
The people who are experiencing the abuse are not able to, they can't get to a phone and call the police. Mm-hmm. Nobody sees their bruises and cuts and sexual assaults. It's just hidden. And so we're trying to bring it out into the open, and we're very grateful to talk to you today.
Yes.
That's my thought. Susan, why do you think it's accepted?
Our society is judged by how we treat the vulnerable. And we treat animals better than we treat our elderly people. Our legislation for the protection of animals is far more robust than our legislation to protect our elderly. And as Carol said, it's hidden. There's family members who don't know what is happening. I have a medical background. I was able to investigate myself, so I knew what was missing and what had happened and not happened and should have been addressed. But not other people, other loved ones of elderly might not know that and might, have no recourse, not even know that they have a recourse. And then when they do, it's lacking. It is lacking.
Okay, we're just about out of time. Any response from the letter at this point yet?
Sadly, no, but we are not stopping.
Yeah.
Just going to keep on. Yep.
Okay, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. And this is important work that you're doing, and let's keep in touch.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Todd. Okay,
bye-bye. You got a Carol MacKenzie and Susan Charlton from the ACE team. The Halifax Mooseheads have a new head coach. We'll chat with that person when we come back. All right, Brad MacKenzie has been named the head coach of the Halifax Mooseheads. Brad MacKenzie joins me to talk with this. Brad, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, Todd, thanks for having me.
All right, congratulations first off.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
All right, so you spent the last 5 seasons with the team as what was your role? An associate coach?
Yeah, so last season I was the associate coach, and the previous 3 seasons to that I was an assistant coach.
Okay, so what was the process? Tell me how this happened. Interview process, or who did the team approach you? How did this all come to pass?
Yeah, honestly, it all kind of came together fairly quickly. I had gone through an interview process with the team in years past for the head coaching position, and this past year here when Andrew Lord took over the team, when he got the position in Ontario in the American Hockey League, that happened fairly quickly for him early last week. And as soon as that happened, I had a conversation with our general manager, our owner, another sort of follow-up conversation mid last week, and was offered the position by the end of the week. So really in a matter of a few days, it all came together. I think it's a little different when there's familiarity. It's not like I'm a guy that they didn't know and had to go through an extensive interview process. They know me through working with me for the last 4 years. And like I said, I have gone through kind of that more formal interview type process with the team over the last couple of years.
Okay, so you're 32 years old from Prince Edward Island. For those who don't know about your hockey background, I guess give everybody a bit of your history. Yeah,
so grew up here in PEI. Started coaching at an early age, to be honest. I got coaching and working at hockey schools when I was 13 years old, and really for me made the transition into kind of going down the path of being a coach when I was 19. I went over to Finland. I went to a school called the Veinotte Sports Institute in Finland, which is a specific university program for hockey coaching. It's run by the International Ice Hockey Federation. So I spent 2 seasons over in Europe before moving back to PEI. Had a chance to be an assistant coach with the University of PEI men's hockey team here before getting my first job in the Quebec League, and that was as an assistant coach for the Charlottetown Islanders. I was there for 3 seasons. Ultimately, my goal is always to be a head coach, and so what I did at that point was I went down a level to Junior A to be a head coach for a couple of seasons with the Grand Falls Rapids in the Maritime Hockey League before Halifax called me a few years back. So got an opportunity to get back into the Quebec League with a great organization as an assistant coach in Halifax 5 years ago, and here we are today.
All right. Well, how would you describe your coaching style?
For me, it's I'm a development first guy, and that's always been my background is in development. And I think the way that you win hockey games, which is ultimately what we're all in this thing for, is you develop the individual players and you develop the team. So for me, it's really it's a partnership with the players. It's trying to make sure that each and every day we as coaches and as a staff are trying to be the best versions of ourselves, and we're trying to help the players to do that as well. That means that, accountability is a big piece to that. Every single day we're trying to push the players outside of their comfort zone to be better versions of themselves. As a team, we have our standards, and our goal is to try to raise the standards every day. So holding players accountable is incredibly important towards that. I think the way that we operate on a day-to-day basis is it's a lot of work. We make sure that work ethic is number one, but it's competitive, but you can also have a lot of fun when you're at the rink. So high energy type of person. We're going to have fun, but we're going to compete hard and we're going to work hard. And that's the way our team's going to look on the ice as well.
Right. So you say accountable. Does that mean work ethic? Does that mean how much? Kind of dive into that a little more, please. Yeah.
So for me, accountability is, you set the standard for how your team wants to play the game. You set your standard for how the team culture needs to be. And then on an individual basis, you have your expectations for the individual player or what you expect on a day-to-day basis in terms of work ethic, their habits on and off the ice, all that stuff. And accountability is just making sure that as a coach, we stay on them about making sure that they're living up to those expectations. And, human nature is usually that, when things can get tough or when you're tired, it's easy to sort of slip into some bad habits. And so for us, it's about trying to make sure that every single day, like I alluded to earlier, you're being the best version of yourself. So if you're tired and it's, 20 games into the season and you're in the middle of the grind, are we still showing up to the rink and putting our best foot forward, giving 100%, making sure that there's attention to detail in everything that we do. For me, that's really the number one job of a coach, is to try to raise the bar and the standard of excellence every single day.
Yeah, 32. You're a decade, I guess, or so removed from a lot of these kids in their age group. So that's not a couple generations or anything like that. So I suppose that I would think is beneficial to kind of understand what young people go through in this generation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like I said, I got into coaching early. So in those early days, for me, you go back 10 years and I was just about the same age as the players I was coaching, maybe only a couple of years older. And what I learned then is, to build the relationship with the guys and to make sure that they understand that I'm in it to help them get better and need to prove myself through my own work ethic and my dedication that I'm there to provide an environment for them to get better. So I think having that, that understanding is something that the players come to respect. So now, as you say, just over a decade removed from these guys, I think I grew up in a similar era. Times change quickly, as you know, but I understand where these guys are coming out with, the world of technology and all that kind of stuff that plays into a lot of their day-to-day lives right now. And so we're able to manage some of those things and manage those relationships accordingly.
What are your expectations for the team this year? Obviously, last year, a bit of a rebuilding year, and the 16th seed snuck into the playoffs and made some serious waves with Drummondville. So what are the expectations here?
Well, we're really excited because we have such a high rate of returning players from last season. I think number one is we knew last season was that kind of first year of this next core of players that we're going to build around. And, obviously the expectation is to take another step forward with our group. We're still going to be a young team. There's no question about it. But with that being said, we're a young team that has experience now. We've got a lot of guys that have a good year under their belt at a minimum. We've got a lot of guys, I think, that experience to go through that playoff round and a Game 7 win is something that oftentimes it takes you a couple of years with your group to get that kind of experience. So we're hoping that can fast track it a little bit for us. We're really excited about the direction of the team. We're excited about the amount of returning players and the amount of skill and depth that we have. So it's all about taking that next step forward for us.
And, of course, relatively new ownership of the team, and that's always exciting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've certainly seen the support from them from day one when the Simons took over, and I've been fortunate to be here, through that transition. And Bobby did a lot of great things with the team, obviously, before he sold it, and since the Simons have taken over, They took over halfway through that year when we ended up going to the league final. Great experience there for everybody. And then you go through, the next season and there's a lot of changes with the organization and staff and things like that. And I really feel like they, after a couple of years here, they're putting their fingerprints on this team of how they want, the Halifax Mooseheads organization to look, right from the culture of the staff to the culture of the players, the type of people that we bring in. So I'm really excited to be a part of that.
All right. So I guess are the expectations to win a championship this year?
Well, I think you're always trying to win a championship.
Sure.
That's why we do what we do.
Yeah, that's right.
We're competitive, but we've got to make sure that we take the appropriate steps. I think that oftentimes in this game, you try to fast track things, and for us, it's all about managing what the steps are appropriately. Last year, I thought we took a really good first step. This year's about taking the next step and seeing where the cards fall at the end of the day with that. So, hey, we're excited. We think that we can win a whole lot of hockey games this year. We like the competitiveness of our group, the experience that we had last year, and it's all about just continuing to trend towards that championship ultimately at the end of the day. When that'll be, we'll have to wait and see, but we're really excited with the direction that we're headed.
All right, Brad, again, congratulations. Look forward to chatting again in the season. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Anytime.
All right, take care. Brad MacKenzie, Mooseheads head coach. Honeybee swarming season in Nova Scotia. What's this all about? Find out when we come back. All right, I saw the story on the CTV website. A honeybee keeper shares timely advice in case you encounter a bee swarm. Graham McGuire is a hobby beekeeper in Hammonds Plains and joins me here in studio. Graham, thanks for coming in.
Hi, Todd.
All right, so you brought along your two sons here?
Yep, that's right. Gabriel and Noah are here.
And they're aspiring beekeepers as well, are they?
Yeah, they help me out a lot in the yard.
All right, so how long have you been a hobby beekeeper?
Just a couple of years now.
Yeah, and what made you decide that you wanted to do that?
Well, we have a small kind of homestead, big gardens and stuff out our way, and we wanted to have some honey, and we wanted to have pollinators in the garden. So, yeah, just very fascinating insects, too.
Yeah, for sure. And how did you educate yourself on all of this?
Mostly with, online resources and reading. There's a lot of good material on YouTube. I haven't really taken advantage of it, but there's also courses that are offered by some of the beekeeping shops, and the Nova Scotia Beekeepers Association has resources as well for training.
Nice. Okay. All right. So what is a swarm?
So a swarm is one of the methods that bees reproduce. So the individual bees reproduce sexually, but as a superorganism, they reproduce by division. So during the peak part of the summer, when the hive is full of nectar, brood, and pollen, the queen will take off with approximately half of the bees and go look to establish a new colony, and the colony that she leaves behind raises a new queen. So when they take off, they'll go and land in a tree or sometimes on the side of a building or something like that, and then they send out scouts looking for a new place to live. Now, obviously, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a little bit concerning. Generally, a swarm of bees landing in a tree is not really posing any danger to anyone, but the reason we go to collect them is mostly so that they don't end up living in somebody's attic or in the wall of a house or garage or something, which could be a much bigger problem if you got honey dripping from your ceiling.
Okay, so you say go to collect them. What do you mean by that?
So if they land in a tree, if you can access them with a ladder, climb up and snip the branch off and shake them off into a box, and then you can just take them with you and put them in a hive in your apiary. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a collection might be a little bit more involved or maybe even impossible if they're really high up somewhere or inaccessible. And then there are people, I haven't done them, but there are people who do what are called cutouts. So if bees have moved into the side of a building or something similar, you have to go in and remove the siding or the drywall and physically cut the combs out of the side of the building. That's what we're trying to avoid by collecting swarms. Yeah.
All right. So how often are swarms encountered? Is this is not a common thing, or how would you describe it?
It's pretty common. So during sort of this peak season, June, July, we get lots of calls. The Nova Scotia Beekeepers Association has a big list of people all over the province who volunteer their time. In some cases, they might charge for something like a cutout, but generally speaking, it's free of charge. And we get calls all the time, all over HRM, but there's people all over the whole province who do this.
Okay, and what advice do you give to people not to do when they encounter a swarm?
Yeah, probably just keep a safe distance. Go on Google, find the Nova Scotia Beekeepers Association swarm list, and give somebody a call off the list. Or there are a few Facebook groups too, where pretty easy to find, where they could post asking for help about it.
Does the swarm does it kind of stay in the same area, or does it, how mobile is it?
Yeah, I mean, bees are semi-domesticated, so you can't always make them do what you want to do. Generally speaking, once a swarm sets alight in a tree or elsewhere, they might be there anywhere from a few minutes to a couple of days.
Yeah.
So it kind of, your mileage varies depending on what kind of a mood they're in.
So once you get a call, you may respond and they may have moved on.
That does happen. Usually if somebody calls, I'll ask for some pictures, and I'll ask them to let me know if the swarm leaves, so I'm not driving unnecessarily. But the last one we went, we got the call in the evening or the afternoon, and they were still there the next morning when we got out to it.
Okay, and how do people identify if it's a honeybee swarm as opposed to perhaps something else, or are there other that are similar?
Yeah, a honeybee swarm is pretty distinctive, so it doesn't look like obviously a wasp nest or something like that. It's a big ball of bees, generally speaking, somewhere between maybe grapefruit size and basketball size, clump of bees, all in a tree. There's obviously going to be some flying around as well, but it's pretty distinctive. You'll know it when you see it.
Are most honeybees wild or domesticated, or how would you describe the population?
Most honeybees would be domesticated or semi-domesticated. They're actually not a native species to North America. They were brought here as part of the Columbian Exchange after Europeans arrived. So, this isn't their native habitat. And so while they have thrived here, most of the colonies are managed, especially by commercial beekeepers. So hobby beekeepers would have a very tiny minority compared to somebody like the Bragg Group or the Oxford Frozen Foods. I think they have something like 30,000 colonies out here. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So and is it profitable?
I think it's a tough business in terms. It's like agriculture. So those big commercial guys, they're doing it mostly for pollination as part of their agricultural operations. But for hobbyists, I mean, I don't know that anybody gets into a hobby to make money at it. I certainly haven't.
Yeah. How long does a honeybee live? What's the lifespan for a honeybee?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It depends on the season. So during the summer, they sort of work themselves to death in the space of 4 to 6 weeks. Over the winter, though, there's a special type of bee that's raised toward the end of the summer as they're getting ready for winter. And in some climates, those bees can live 180 days, 200 plus days, because they form a cluster, and they're not really able to raise very much or any brood over the coldest months of the year when there's no pollen or nectar available and the temperatures are low. So those bees live a lot longer, and they don't go totally dormant during the winter. They sort of huddle together and keep warm in a cluster inside the colony.
And how many of the bees procreate?
How many bees are in a colony?
Yeah.
It depends. A small colony might have, a few thousand bees. A big colony might have 40,000 bees.
No, I guess my question is how many produce bees? Do they all?
Oh no, there's only one fertile female in the colony, the queen. All of the other workers are females, but they haven't mated, so they're unable to lay fertilized eggs. And then there's obviously male bees, drones. The sex of the bee is determined by whether the egg was fertilized or not. So it's pretty interesting. That one queen bee is laying her entire body weight of eggs every single day, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How long does the queen live for?
I think the queen lifespan has been reduced in recent years, probably because of the introduction of a lot of chemicals, either inside the hives by the beekeepers themselves to control pests, but also agricultural chemicals. So you hear stories from the past of queen bees living for several years. A lot of the commercial operators now are requeening even a couple of times a season.
Somebody asked via email, what's the difference between a honeybee and a bumblebee?
Bumblebees are bigger and fuzzier. Bumblebees are solitary. They overwinter as a solitary bee. So they don't have a big colony. They don't go through the winter as a big colony. Just the queen will go through the winter. That's similar to wasps and hornets. They don't overwinter as a colony. The honeybees are smaller. They're not as fuzzy. It's pretty distinctive if you take a picture of it and compare it to some of the images on Google.
Okay, very interesting, Graham. If people want to know more, is there a website they can check you out on? Or
I don't have a beekeeping website. I have a website for my firm, and I would say if you see a swarm, just check out the Nova Scotia Beekeepers Association.
Okay, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Todd.
All right, interesting. Graham McGuire, a hobby beekeeper. Your calls when we come back. All right, taking your calls. What is on your mind today? The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Give us a call. What is percolating to the top of your mind today? Again, 902-405-6000. Get into whatever you'd like on this Tuesday. Again, 902-405-6000 is the way to reach us. We got open lines for you. Give us a call if you'd like to have your say. A couple of the things that caught my attention today. This in the Chronicle Herald this morning. Halifax Regional Council considering closing the Cogswell Park designated encampment. The 25-story seniors development set to open its doors on Quinpool Road. It's time to close the Cogswell Park homeless encampment nearby, it says the area councillor Virginia Hinch. She brought a motion to Regional Council last week to look at closing the encampment on Cogswell Park, the triangle of grass between Windsor, Parker, and Wellsford Streets. It's one of 4 designated encampments left after the municipality shut down the Gary Street site in Dartmouth on June 25th. Here's a quote from Virginia. She says, residents and passerby have witnessed ongoing criminal activity, including drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, prostitution, theft, and tent fires. She says, adding that there's a petition of about 130 names on the petition. The encampment was designated in July of 2024 with an occupancy of 8 tents. There are now 23 tents. So, look, folks, here's, I guess, some of the fundamental questions that I have to ask you about is first of all, why are police allowing widespread illegal activity here in these encampments? Is it basically legal now to use hard drugs in public? Is it, for all intents and purposes, legal to use hard drugs and I suppose deal hard drugs in public? Does enforcement act as an effective deterrent? That's the other question, right? Because if police went in and started cracking down and arresting people, would that serve as an effective deterrent? And what would the result be? Obviously, you would be burdening the justice system, the courts, police, and if there were incarcerations, of course, the jails, which are already stretched to the max. So there's no easy answer here, folks, when it comes to this stuff. I get that, but my goodness gracious. What should be done about this, and is it fair to the surrounding communities to have an encampment site? Is it fair to those people who have properties and businesses that surround these encampments? Because, look, your property value would be greatly diminished as a result of this. And again, your business could be greatly impacted because people might avoid your business. And I could see why. So what are your thoughts on encampments, folks, here in HRM? Is it time to do something about this or I guess the question is what? What do you do? Because the homelessness is not going to change. People are going to probably pitch tents somewhere else. And then what do you do where they're unsanctioned encampments? Because that's going to be the result. And we've seen it already. So encampments, what should be done? What could be done? Are you impacted by this? Is your property impacted by this? Is this happening in your vicinity? And are you frustrated and fed up with it if you are impacted by this? I think these are legitimate questions. And do you think that police should be doing more to crack down on this type of activity? Again, criminal activity, drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, prostitution, theft. I mean, these are pretty serious things. These are not casual things, folks. These are serious issues that you would think that police would be involved in. Look, back in the day, if you were doing hard drugs or something like that in the open, I mean, look, there was a time when if you were smoking a joint in the open, you could be easily arrested for that, let alone doing hard drugs, needles. 902-405-6000, that's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. So what's your take on that? Also, the Conservatives want Prime Minister Mark Carney to sell the assets in his blind trust to avoid any possible conflicts of interest. Carney set up a blind trust after he was sworn in as Prime Minister in March, and the details of how it works were made public on Friday. They show the Prime Minister has set up screens to avoid potential conflicts related to his previous interest in Brookfield Asset Management and Brookfield Corporation and Stripe Inc. But Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says that's not enough. Pierre Poilievre says that Mark Carney should have to sell all he's got, sell it all, turn it into cash, liquidate it, and then allow a trustee to set up and purchase new investments and manage it from there. Do you agree with that? Should it go that far? Or do you think that's unreasonable to expect Mark Carney to do that, or any politician to do that? There would be massive tax implications, obviously. It would be a huge disincentive for a lot of people to get into politics. I guess fundamentally, do you trust that Mark Carney will follow the rules and not be influenced in decisions when it comes to policy, which could potentially benefit his businesses, which are in a blind trust, but he still has and knows that he has them. He doesn't know how they're being managed, ostensibly, with his screen. What are your thoughts on that? 902-405-6000. All right, let's go to the phone. Let's talk to John. Hello, John.
Good morning, Todd. How are you doing today?
I'm well, you?
Not too bad, thank you. Todd, I don't live near any encampments out here in South Shore. However, we have the same problems in there as far as drug abuse, dealing, as any major city does. And just for a little eye-opener, police hands are tied. I had to chat with an officer here a short time ago. I described to him a situation where a friend of mine had a crack house across the road. He's tried to get local officials involved to get it cleaned up. Could do nothing. RSMB can't do nothing. They won't do anything because of the ethnic background of this person. And the officer said it's like this. The courts do not want to be filled up with people who are small dealers. They want the big people. So the people who are dealing in hard drugs and they're selling however they sell it, whether it's dimes, nickels, I don't know I don't know nothing about the culture of that stuff. But yeah, they're just turning a blind eye. It's a shame, but that's the police can't. Their hands are tied.
Why do you say that? Why do you say their hands are tied?
Well, because if they go to court, there's nothing happens.
Yeah.
There's one particular place where I know it's going on. The guy's been in the jail numerous times. He's known this is what he's doing for. This is what he does for a living.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and the judges, you try to. They got bigger fish they want to fry instead of the guy that's. And to me, they're both important because a lot of young people are getting severely messed up for the rest of their lives with some of this crap. And I'm not talking about marijuana, but
yeah,
it's not like back in the 60s and the 70s, Todd. It's serious, brain damaging, drugs. And yeah, I don't know where it's going to end. And as far as these experiments with making this one item semi-legal and giving the kids a place to go and do it where they're monitored, I don't agree with none of that. That's just foolishness. I think that's why we're at where we're at today. We have to have a society where there are rules. If they're broken, there's consequences. Right now, it's pretty loosely knit what happens. Anyway, my friend, there's my experience.
Okay, John, appreciate
and most. I'll say one thing, Todd, before I go.
Yeah.
Most people do not want to get involved because these dealers, they have no ethics. So if you're a pain in their arse, you're going to be burned out.
Okay, John, appreciate the call. Take care. 902-405-6000. Joe, hello.
Hey, Todd.
Hi.
Hi. I agree with the last caller. But the thing is, we need a solution. Like, throwing rocks in a pond isn't a solution. I really think if this government that we have is going to spend the amount of money that we have dedicated to shoring up our I don't know, like our forces, the Navy, Army, honestly, I really think that you need to provide a solution to homelessness, and setting up little houses, great, but if we really want a solution, I really think, and I think I brought this up to you before, like, they need to recruit, and I think that is a solution. Like, it's a future. And
What do you mean, conscript people into the military? Is that what you're saying?
No, not conscript. Go in and say who wants this, because nobody wants what their life is right now, in terms of living in a tent and, all the things that you brought up. I think that if you have a state of mind that says, listen, this is a future for you. This is something that you can have, that you can build whatever, a family on, just going forward, like there needs to be a solution. You can't just build houses and, expect people to live that way. There needs to be a solution there, Todd. And, that's basically, like if they go in and they recruit, like if they say, because you're going to need people that can handle somebody who's been addicted to drugs for a long time. So it's not going to, you're not going to be heavy handing things, right? Like you got to go in and say, hey, listen, this is something that you can build a future with. Like, if you got kids, I'm not sure, whatever, but go in and say, hey, listen, we're going to be spending billions of dollars on our military, and these are good people. Like, they're good people. They're not what's been described as homelessness and just prostitution and drugs and stuff like that. Like, you have to deal with that at the same time that you offer a solution. That's really, otherwise trades come in, like, recruit these guys, like seriously recruit them.
Well, I
I
don't know that military recruiting drives in homelessness encampments is a solution. To be honest with you, Joe, I don't think that would be effective.
Why not?
Well, because they already know that those because people are in an encampment for a reason, right? Because they're often addicted.
Yeah, because they don't have a solution, Todd.
Well, they had solutions at one point. Everybody has options at some point, you know.
Todd, I wouldn't say that.
Joe, here's what I'm saying. Okay, is that when somebody gets to a point when they're in a tent, and they're addicted to drugs, in particular hard drugs, a military recruiter ain't going to be the answer, in my opinion. That's not gonna happen.
Well, why do you say that? I don't see that. Todd, I have
because
a different opinion on that.
Joe, have you ever known anybody who's been heavily addicted to anything?
Yeah.
Okay, that is their number one influence in life. That is their number one focus in life. That's not a criticism. That's reality. That is their job. That is their focus. It's addiction. Not about
That's addiction, Todd.
That's right. That's exactly right. So that's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So you need to break that. Well, you need to give you need to make the addiction life, not drugs.
Okay, Joe. Thanks for the call. I just don't think that sending in military recruiters to encampment sites is a good idea. I think that's a complete waste of time. 902-405-6000. But listen, folks, this is why I open the phone lines, to get ideas. 902-405-6000. What are the solutions? What are your thoughts on this, folks? What can we do about encampments? This is a very serious situation, and I don't have any solutions, but this is why we're having the conversations. 902-405-6000. We'll be back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Encampments is one of the things that I'm asking you to weigh in on, because Virginia Hinch, a counselor in HRM in the North End area, is asking that an encampment in her district be closed because of a number of reasons. First of all, criminal activity, including drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, prostitution, theft, and tent fires. And what are your thoughts on this, folks? Listen, if I had a property surrounding one of these encampments, I would be all for this, and I would want it shut down. Call that selfish, call it what you will. Look, I get it that people are homeless and people are going to go somewhere. I get that, but at some point you have to think that property owners should get some protection. 902-405-6000. Steve, hello.
Hey, Todd. Happy Tuesday to you.
Sure.
Encampments are a delicate, I would say in my mind, a delicate subject, because there are people out there that are suffering, and for some reasons they can't go inside and they need to be outside. Yes, I agree with you 100%. If it was in my backyard, yeah, I wouldn't want it. It would affect my property value and my quality of life and things like that. On the other side of the coin, I know that my wife went down to do a dog walk a couple of years ago when they had the one at Grand Parade Square, I think it was, in front of the City Hall. And like she said, all of these people were passed out on benches on basically overdosing on drugs, or maybe smoking too much pot or whatever. So, I mean, there are some serious issues. It is, as you've said before, this is an incredibly complex problem. Mm-hmm. And I personally don't have a solution to it. I think shutting them down without understanding who is there and why they're there needs to be better understood, because every human being, every individual has differing issues. And I think that they need to understand that first and foremost. That's just my thinking on encampments. I say I don't have one out in my area, but I do agree with you is that if it was in my area, I probably would say I don't want it. But then you have to put the human being hat on and say, why are they there? What can I do to help them? That's one of my two things I wanted to address.
Okay.
What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, but again, it comes down to you want to help them, but you just said not if it's going to affect you and your property value and your quality of life.
Yeah, it's very duplicitous of me, isn't it?
But I hear you. I'm the same way. Look, and I think members of council would, if they were being honest with you, would say the same thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. And you've said this for the last 3, 4, 5 years. This is not an easy solution. It's very complex because you have one individual and 2 individuals, 3 individuals. They all have certain issues. So I will leave it at that. The other one I wanted to address was there was this on the Councillors in the Hot Seat on Monday.
Yeah.
You had I think the guy's name was Ken who called in. And, granted, I don't live in Dartmouth, and maybe I'm not a Sam Austin fan, but when Sam gave empirical data, he snickered and he laughed. And elected officials are elected officials. Yes, you're going to put up with a bunch of crap. I found that incredibly disrespectful of him to be like that. That's my opinion. I'm not defending Sam in any way. Sam can defend himself.
Yeah.
But I found for somebody to, when he gets given data, and your words exactly were, this is empirical data, and he still laughed and snickered. I don't even have any way to validate that I would respect anything that person says in the future. Yeah. And like I said, I'm not a supporter of Sam, but I don't think anyone, regardless of whether you're elected or non-elected, should be treated in that manner. What do you think?
Well, sure. I mean, look, like I said, the conversation ends when, as far as I'm concerned, or needs to end when, like you said, data is given and somebody just says, well, I don't believe it. And look, there are people out there who are entrenched in their ideas, and data only is real data if you agree with it. If you don't agree with it, then it's not legit. And that to me is anyway. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it, pal.
Not sure where to go with that one then.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Todd. Have a good one.
902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000, something that we're talking about today. Again, it is an open hour. You can get into whatever you'd like, but we're talking so far a lot about encampments because Virginia Hinch, a councillor in the Halifax Peninsula North area, brought a motion to Regional Council last week to look at closing an encampment in her district. One of 4 designated encampments left after the municipality shut down Gary Street site in Dartmouth on June 25th. And she says that residents and passerbys are talking about witnessing ongoing criminal activity, including drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, prostitution, theft, and more. And I'm asking you folks, what are your thoughts on this? And look, I'm being quite frank that if I lived in this area or if I were impacted by this, I would be all for this motion. I would want this encampment closed down. And look, call that insensitive, call it what you will, but I'm just being honest with you. Now, I get it that people are in a tough situation who are homeless, and it can happen to any of us. It truly can. And I realize that they'll end up going somewhere else, and I get that. But my gosh, at some point you have to defend properties and business owners and taxpayers as well. They have to have some rights here. And people's property values and quality of life are being impacted immensely by these encampments. And 902-405-6000. What's your take on all this, folks? Sherry, hello.
Good morning.
Hi there.
How are you?
Well, you?
Good. I'm calling about the encampment. What people are forgetting to understand, I think, along the way, and I get it. It's impacting people's properties, their quality of life and everything. These people were children. They didn't grow up to ask to be addicts. They didn't grow up thinking, one day I'm going to grow up to be a prostitute. They didn't think any of that stuff. Somewhere along the way, the world failed them, basically, I feel. You have these people that have so much potential, but it's being hidden by the drugs, the alcohol,
Hey, sorry, I'm kind of right behind you there.
And it's just sad. It's very, very sad. The government is putting a Band-Aid fix, I feel, on them by building these little homes. That's just a majority of the problem. That's, it's housing these people, but we're not fixing the underlying problem of the drugs, the addiction. I know one young man said about having these people enlisted. They're not stable enough to be enlisted. We have to get these individuals stable to be able to live a productive life.
How do we get them stable, though? Because that's the challenge, right? How do you do that?
I think we need to focus more on rehabilitation, not enlistment, rehabilitation, where the government's spending thousands, millions of dollars on encampment or in little homes and stuff like that. We need to have more programs to be able to help these people to become clean, to, be able to thrive in society. They're not able to do that. They get caught in a rut. And to be able to move forward, they can't do that on their own. It's an addiction. We all know addiction's illness. Our medical society is failing people with mental health issues. Our government is Band-Aid fixing things by putting, little homes, which is great, getting some people out of tents. But for the majority of people, they're still out there. And they have no place to go. They have nowhere to turn. I'm not saying everybody wants to, sign up for rehab or something like that, but there's a lot of people out there that it's not available.
Well, I hear you, Sherry, but look, one of the steps to getting clean is to have a place to live, right? That is known that unless you have a place to live, then you're really the challenge is massive.
But even in the shelters, there's a place to live within the shelters.
Yeah.
There's a place to live, but the resources aren't there for them to go to rehab. It's not there. I mean, you can talk to counselors all day long, and the frontline workers that work there, they work hard. They really, truly work hard to try to help these people, but they're not educated to be full addiction counselors or rehabilitation workers. They're support workers is what they are. Because there's just not enough rehabilitation. And also the government, people's been homeless for years and years. If you look at Nova Scotia as a whole right now, where our cost of living, an apartment, the rental, people can't afford that. But yet social assistance will keep handing people out money. Even if they're living in like tents or whatever, a little bit of money. That little bit of money is not helping anything. That's only hindering the cause. Instead of taking that amount of money and focusing on the people that want to try to become clean, want to try to get off the streets, don't want to be out, working the streets and stuff like that. They need to start focusing on that. There's too many Band-Aid fixes, and it's not working.
Okay, Sherry, appreciate your call. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
902-405-6000. Jamie, hello.
How you doing today?
I'm well, you?
Good. First of all, I want to let you know I really love your show, man.
Thank you.
I don't always agree with you. In fact, I disagree with you a lot.
That's great.
But that's okay.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Anyways, I just wanted to call and chat about the homelessness situation. I really and truly, in my heart of hearts, believe it's entirely government caused. I mean, I think we've always, like when I was a kid, there were no homeless people, really, none that I could see. But I didn't live in an area where they might be, so maybe they were, invisible to me. But the government, the last government, and I think this one too, they're on this plan to bring Canada to 100 million people, and you just can't do that. It has to come naturally. Like what like doubling our population. How many houses do we have in Canada now? How many homes, I should say? Do we have to double that now? Where's this all coming from? Where's the skills coming from? Where are the materials coming from? Where's the land coming from? It's lunacy, right? And then they cause these problems, and then they make drugs illegal. I have a friend that was just out in Vancouver here last week, and he said it's unbelievable. People are walking around Vancouver bent over like they're trying to pick something up, but that's just the way they walk because they're so disabled from this whatever drugs they're taking. But in any case, I just think looking to the government for answers for this is just, you know what I mean? If you're in a situation you're being treated horribly, you don't ask the person that's treating you horribly how is your life going to be improved?
Yeah.
So to look to the government for the answers for this, like they caused it.
Yeah. How did the government cause it, Jamie? Because of too many people living, too much immigration. Is that what you're saying is the root cause here?
Oh, sure. Sure. I mean, I'm a landlord in the city, and I'm renting, and I see what's happened, and I see who's applying for the units as well as a lot of other people. So it's a lot of new people and new Canadians, and the Canadians that were here, and we're sort of marginal before all of this are now just out. Done. You know what I mean? Right now, the people that are moving in, there might be 3 people moving in with 5 or 6 jobs. And Canadians just aren't into that or whatever, right? The immigrants haven't figured out a taxation system yet and how we get punished for working hard. So Canadians are well aware of that, but the immigrants, they will find out.
Yeah.
Anyways, there you go.
Okay, Jamie, appreciate the call. Take care. 902-405-6000. Albert, hello.
Yes, good morning. I'm worried that this is just going to be another show where we deal with this topic and we just throw up our hands and say how horrible it is, and then we conclude that there's nothing we can do about it. But I agree with the previous caller. Maybe the root cause is rapid population growth and development that favors the rich over the poor. All the buildings going up are, they're tearing down affordable housing and replacing them with, 40-story buildings of very, very expensive housing. Also, we have, the general problem of AI and, computerization, industrialization, which is with a specific aim of rendering obsolete the human being, human input, that causes huge unemployment. And there's just a general breakdown of the fabric of our Western civilization. People just aren't as decent as they used to be. Yeah. But so I don't have a solution for all that, but a temporary solution, which is the problem that was addressed by the counselor, saying, we just don't want this in our neighborhood. And yes, it's not simple NIMBYism. It's people that live in a decent neighborhood that want a safe place for their children to walk, or to walk their pets, and they're surrounded by criminal activity. I've said this before, and it never went anywhere, but I say, if we're going to have homeless tents, homeless encampments, and that is the reality right now, and there's nothing we seem to be able to do about it right now. They're in our neighborhoods, they're all over our parks. I would say just zone them out to the Burnside area, to the industrial area. There's property near correctional institutions where there's, proximity of legal authority figures. Put them out there. They're still on the bus route, so there's people that want to get out of that life and look for a job. There's bus service, and they could reroute bus services to there, and you could have water services. You could even build something more permanent, like mini homes. But right now, we get people in tents. Okay, well, just put the tents out there, and then if you have resources, then you can put some more permanent housing there. And like the compassionate lady who phoned in, then you can send, your social workers and outreach workers and try to get people out of that lifestyle. And that's a whole different area to get into. But for the temporary, for the present, yes, put them out in the proximity of the residential areas.
Yeah, it would be my guess, Albert, that people would not generally want that because they want to commute, or they want to commune in the urban area where they can panhandle and where they can where they're familiar, and that's the challenge, right? Is that, and again, I hear your frustration when you say, okay, we have an hour of this conversation, and at the end of it, nothing's resolved, and everybody kind of throws their hands up and says, "What the hell?" I guess so. I guess, Albert, to try and not try and solve the problem, I guess what my angle on this is that if I had an encampment in my vicinity of my property or my business, and my property value was cut in half or more, and my business was cut in half or more because of it, and I was being harassed when I was walking through the neighborhood by people who are right. If that were the case, then I would be all for a counselor saying let's do something about this. And I think that those people have a right to feel that way. I really do.
Mm-hmm. But you have to remember that the people that they're complaining about is a very, criminal and antisocial population to begin with, and you can't feel too sorry for them being removed from residential areas. This is just a step one solution I'm offering. I hope we might live in some utopian situation where the previous lady suggested we can get them all off of drugs and all away from crime and find gainful employment and permanent housing for all of them. Yes, but I'm just talking about the square one, step one approach. It's better than what we've got now. That's what I would suggest. Have encampments moved away from civil society and have law enforcement available. Because there's some people that probably don't like being surrounded by some homeless people that don't like being surrounded by drug dealers. And so you got to have law enforcement and basic services, and that's the only solution I have.
Okay, Albert, appreciate the call. Thanks so much. All right,
thanks, sir.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. Something tells me that if you push people away and you push them out into areas where they're out of sight, out of mind, then we would never talk about it, right? That's the reason why we're talking about it. Ironically, is because it is happening. And it is impacting other people. If it weren't, we wouldn't be talking about it. So that's the irony of this whole thing. And it's the sad irony of it all. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls. 902-405-6000. Ken giving us a call. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Todd. Just to answer your caller's question about why I laughed at Sam Austin. First of all, it doesn't matter if you're an elected official. Respect is like trust. It's gained. It's not earned because you have a title on your name as city councilor. And here's why I laughed. 16,000, right? That's right. 2,285 cyclists a day during the summer, right? Not a chance in hell. January, 451 a day on the road. Not a chance in hell. That's why I laugh at Sam Austin, because he's not respected as a counselor, right? There's, show me 5 people that called your, or even 3 people that called your radio station and had high praise for Sam Austin. As far as your caller goes, I'm sorry if you're, that gullible that you believe everything. You probably believe that Carney doesn't have anything to do with Brookfield. You probably think that Trump is doing everything for the better of the United States instead of his own pocketbook, right? Anyway, that's all. Thanks, Todd.
Okay, take care. 902-405-6000. Danny, hello.
Hi, how you doing, Todd?
I'm well, you?
Good. I was just going to say, this counselor that doesn't want it in their neighborhood, they didn't seem to care in Sackville. I live out in Sackville, so they didn't seem to care in Sackville when they were putting it out there. They didn't listen to anybody. They put it where they wanted to.
Yeah.
So now that it's in her neighborhood, now it's a big deal. Does that sound fair?
Well, sure. That's true, isn't it? That's true.
Yeah. They put them wherever they wanted to. And so what happens now if they get it out of there and they want to put it in somebody else's neighborhood? Are they just going to force them to take it? Where do these counselors get off thinking they're better than everybody? And I understand about the neighborhood and the price of the houses going down, but they never cared where they put them, as long as it wasn't in their neighborhoods.
Well, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
I remember. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. It's a completely valid point. And like I said, I think that's you're right. If it impacts when something truly impacts you directly, that's when it matters to you. Until then, it doesn't really matter to you, and as far as I'm concerned.
And some of these people in these homeless encampments, I mean, like, they should have to do some kind of I forget how you would say it, but a test to see if they're mentally fit to be on their own. And maybe some of them need to go back to the Nova Scotia hospital or to open up that again, so these people can get the treatment and the care that they need. Like, I mean, if a person's mentally incompetent to be able to even figure stuff out for himself, why are we letting him live in a tent?
Well, that to me is whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, it's never going to happen. You're never going to see that happen again. So that to me is a non-starter. Just in my opinion, Danny, I never envisioned a time when the government builds a hospital to put people in the way that they used to back in the day. I don't see that happening.
No, you're probably right. But I just wanted to mention that about when they put them in our neighborhood, they didn't care.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, thanks for the call.
Yeah, have a good day.
All right, take care. Mike, hello.
Oh, hi. How are you?
I'm well, you?
Pretty good. Yeah, this is a difficult question. It's, fraught with all sorts of, social and political issues. But really, it's symptomatic, really. It's a symptom of what is happening socially. That's really what it is. And, I think, you can treat problems symptomatically, or you can dig deep. I think the academy, I think the intellectuals, I think those who form policy, they need to dig a little deeper and think about what kind of real solutions they need to come up with, lasting solutions.
Do you have any? Go ahead, sorry, Mike.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just find it always surprising that local governments, local communities are the ones who need to solve the problems that are brought upon by the disease in our society today, which is indifference, class, and corruption. And, people should really do their jobs at the top end. They certainly make enough money. And
that's true, but would you agree that it's a very difficult thing to solve, though? Do you believe that there are solutions?
Well, we all just went through this pandemic not too long ago.
Yeah,
and we saw at the very top end of government, federally especially, provincially as well, politicians who are supposedly people in the know, who are aware of and certainly well staffed, certainly well informed by the academy, and they do what we saw in the pandemic. They do what they're told. They work with the tools that they're given to work with, I just think that the academy better start pushing out some better ideas, and sometimes you've got to look at the core. You can't just treat things symptomatically and leave it up to local people to step to it and struggle with these issues. Now, of course, it comes down to the local community, and strong communities are, it's admirable, I think, when you look at this city, what we've been up against in the past and even in the recent past. And we're still here. We're still strong. So, but there has to be compassion, but there has to be hard decision making too. And it's not up to the local people necessarily. Things can't always be foisted on them. We need better leadership at the top end. That's just what I got to say.
Okay, Mike, appreciate the call. Take care. Thanks for the calls, everybody. Didn't get to all of you for that. I apologize. We'll open the phone lines again tomorrow. Rob Thacker in the Science Files when we come back. All right, the more you listen, the more you'll know, especially when Rob Thacker is in studio. The Science Files, St. Mary's University astrophysicist Rob Thacker. What do you think of that? The more you listen, the more you know, right?
Well, I'll go with that for sure. I mean, as long as you don't forget it afterwards.
Well, you can forget it, but whatever, right? As long as you retain
well, you want to retain some of it. Come on,
yeah,
you want to retain some of it.
That's right. Okay, listen, folks, if you'd like to chat with Rob, if you have a question for Rob, a concept you'd like to ask Rob about, give us a call at 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us for the Science Files. You know the drill again, 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. It's interesting, though, as human beings when it comes to, I'm quite fascinated when you think of regular, just straight-up conversation, how the flow, the stream of consciousness reveals itself. It's a very interesting thing, isn't it?
So, in a funny kind of way, it's actually predictably unpredictable, right? That when you think about what people know and the things that they want to talk about, that you would think that they would follow very distinct patterns. And they do, but whenever we have a conversation, and it's like you've started something now, and you've set me off on a track where I'm thinking, well, what am I going to say about this?
Sure.
And so I'm going to go back to sort of like language theory and how we relate to that and so on. And so it's funny that you really do find yourself going in unexpected directions, even though it's a topic of discussion that you've had before.
Yeah. Right. And in the back of the mind is processing the next thought while you're verbalizing at the same time, and it's a pretty amazing thing.
So that's what I find really interesting, how when we talk in this fashion, I'm consciously thinking about what I'm saying, but my brain is already ahead of me in coming up with the next thing that I'm going to say. Right. And I find that absolutely amazing because there is an element of multitasking to that. Right. I mean, I've literally, my brain is thinking about the concepts while making my body vocalize what I'm talking about. So guys can do more than one thing at a time.
That's
right? It's a pretty incredible thing. And the other thing is, what I find absolutely fascinating is we tend to think of the brain solely in terms of our conscious thinking. But there are plenty of things that we do regularly when we're awake that we do without thinking. And the classic one that I will give to you, which I think is actually kind of incredible, is like walking upstairs, right? You probably have jogged upstairs, run upstairs without thinking about it while you're completely conscious. Yet if I put a heavy object in your hand and then you have to think about one foot in front of another and going down, it suddenly becomes a much, much harder thing to do. Right, which I think tells you about how the different parts of the brain process differently.
Yeah, for sure. And 902-405-6000. As far as the language goes, I mean, countless species have language. Do all species have a language of some sort?
So I think people would dispute whether other species have language that are as sophisticated as what we have. We have a very, very elaborate system of communication that augments our conscious thinking as well. But it's very clear, I think, that although that may be true for humans, when you look at actual conscious thought itself, there's clearly a lot of stuff that happens without being embodied within language. And so animals absolutely have that. Yes, they do. And they have their own communication patterns, as we've just said. And they do have ways of transmitting information. I mean, the classic one, let's talk about bees, right? And so bees going to the hive, doing their little dance, shimmying around, is literally telling other bees where to go to find the nectar, right? So clearly there is real communication. And that for me is pretty incredible. I mean, bees, funnily enough, I mean, we talked about this last week. I think bees are really amazing from an evolutionary perspective, right? That they discovered ways of actually turning nectar into honey by adding acidity, and on top of that, getting the water out of it to do a long-term preservation of this really sweet and sugary stuff. But nonetheless, the bacteria have a struggle to really grow on. So there's a lot of really amazing things in bees.
For sure. 902-405-6000. David's giving us a call. Hello, David.
Good morning, Todd. Good morning, Dr. Rob.
Hey there.
Me again.
Yeah.
All good. I got 3 questions for you.
Okay.
One, how do you tell if it's a queen bee? Number 2, I've been watching the BBC, Our Planets, with Brian Cox. I think that's his name.
Yep.
And I was just wondering why Our moon is bigger than all the other moons.
Right, yeah.
And why is the sun bigger than all the planets? That's number 3.
Sure. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So with the queen bee, I mean, the queen bee is bigger than the other bees and is basically looked after by a whole bunch of bees around it. So anyone who's a beekeeper will be able to find that pretty quickly. And that also happens when you have swarming events and so on, that they'll be able to find the queen bee within all of the big
so don't step on the queen bee.
Yep. So that's, if you know what you're doing, it's actually not too difficult to do. And then with why is our moon so much bigger than other moons? That is a really good question. And so that is because we think our moon was formed in a fairly unique way. And so our moon, the best explanation for how we have the Earth-Moon system formed was that there was sort of like a proto-Earth, not as big as the Earth is right now, and then there was another proto-planet, possibly a little bit smaller than Mars, around that size, that collided with the Earth. That created this big debris field, which...
Another Big Bang Theory?
You could say that, sure. And that big debris field ended up condensing into the moon. The rest of the stuff fell back onto what's now the Earth. And so you have these two objects that are formed going around. That sort of like orbital stuff is the residual energy of the collision in there. And so that is actually quite a good theory that fits a lot of things as well.
Okay.
And so what was the last question? Why is the sun so much bigger than everything else? So that's a good question too. And the answer to that is once gravity gets going at the center of the distribution, it's just going to keep on pulling more and more stuff down. So basically the sun will pull as much stuff as it can down, and that's limited by things that are rotating or orbiting around it. After a certain point, there's what we call the orbital barrier. You can't actually get the material down to it. So the sun will suck up as much material as possible before you start hitting that orbital barrier, and that's why you end up with planets going around the sun rather than actually being sucked into it.
Would it explode if it got any bigger?
So, if it got... Well, I mean, it's going to explode in a funny kind of way. It's going to explode very slowly. My colleagues might debate whether it's really exploding or not, but it will swell up into a red giant star in about 4 billion years. And so
that's when I just had it at the top of my head. Supernova. There you go.
So the sun isn't big enough to actually be a supernova. We need to add maybe about 4 or 5 times more mass again for it to be able to supernova. But what it will do is it will swell up into a red giant, and then it will blow off those outer layers, right, in what we call a nova. So then you'll be left with a white dwarf star at the end, which is basically a giant carbon star, right?
Would it cause a sonic wave?
How to put this? So it will certainly have an impact on what we would call the interstellar medium sound, but not in a way that you and I understand sound. We understand sound as something that goes through air, and the disturbances that go through the interstellar medium, as we call it, are very, very different. You wouldn't be able to hear them with your ears, for example.
Okay, and when the supernova hits, it wouldn't spread all the planets around?
So it will just be what we call a nova. It won't be big enough to be called a supernova. And so that will be an ejection of material not really at crazy high speeds, and it's not too dense either, but it was certainly, if you were in the solar system at that time, you would certainly feel the impact of it for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, bud. Take care. Okay, 902-405-6000. Paul's giving us a call. Hello, Paul.
Yes, good morning.
Hi there.
Dr. Thacker. Hi.
Hi.
Dr. Thacker, I was wondering why you come on Todd's show. To you, is imparting knowledge more important, or do you just really want to hear some questions?
I just genuinely enjoy talking to people. Right. And every now and again you get a question on the show which really makes me think. Right. And this is one of those questions. So well done, Paul. And so, but I've always, in a funny kind of way, it's paying it forward a little bit, that I really enjoyed growing up in a household that wasn't necessarily a particularly educated household. Neither my mum and dad graduated from high school. but they were always curious. And my mum loved crossword puzzles and things like that. And my dad just liked talking about things. And so here I am several decades later, and mum and dad have effectively gone. My mum has unfortunately got dementia, and my dad passed away a few years ago. But that spirit of being curious and asking questions really is part of who I am. So that's really why I come on the show and do that, because I really love talking to other people that are driven by that same sense of curiosity, because I think it's a really important part of the human experience.
Okay, well, you've been doing this for a while now. Are there any questions that stand out that made you go, gee, I never thought of that before? Look into that.
I'm sure there are, but they're not coming off the top of my head right like that. I mean, the questions that, there are questions that I struggle with, right? And right, really the one that I genuinely do struggle with is consciousness. Right. And people often talk about that. What is that? And so on. And we really don't know. And we don't really even have a way of figuring out what it is. Right. And that's a really big question now because of artificial intelligence, people wondering about that and sort of discussing whether things could be consciousness or not. And my reaction to that with anyone who works in this field is, how can we talk about whether something is conscious or not when we don't know what consciousness is? Right. And that, for me, is just this huge question. And I don't know how we really can go about it, because we can even think about sort of like using MRIs on brains and things like that. And we can relate areas of the brain to consciousness and things like that. But we still cannot relate that to this incredible experience that we have on a day-to-day basis. And then that just kind of blows my mind.
Okay. Is AI going to be answering the question of consciousness?
I don't know how it can. Right, is my honest answer, and I certainly I'll sort of like wear my heart on my sleeve about what I think about the algorithms that we have in place right now, and I don't see how they can mimic the kind of things that are going on in the human brain that appear to be related to consciousness in one way or the other. And I could be wrong. I mean, there's obviously information processing that happens in the brain that is done subconsciously. Like you aren't consciously aware of doing it. And funnily enough, we just talked about going up the stairs. And that's a really good example. You can just run up the stairs without thinking about it, right, when you've done it so many times. And so obviously something is being done in the brain, but you aren't consciously processing it.
Right. You're unconsciously processing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Okay, Paul, take care. 902-456. One of the issues that I think that often gets brought up, of course, is extraterrestrial life and spacecraft, alien, and all that stuff, and that is something that's been a recurrence since I've been done the show with you. I'm sure with Rick you got it as well,
for sure.
And that is something that you've kind of maintained your kind of I suppose stance on that. You're a skeptic.
I'm a skeptic. Yeah, and I am, because it's a huge thing, right? The same way that I think consciousness is a huge thing. That the possibility of other forms of life in the universe is a really, really important thing. And the fact that it's so important means that I'm not going to honestly put much weight in the reports of individual people. I'm looking for a very, very high standard of evidence for that. And for some people, they find that upsetting, because that means they feel that means I'm saying I don't trust them. But it's not about them. Yeah. It's about the process, right? And so I've always tried to be as clear as I possibly can on that. So, but where I think there are real possibilities for the future is that we're building telescopes right now that have an outside chance of being able to measure the atmospheres of planets around other stars. Planets a bit like the Earth. There's an outside chance. It's going to take a long time. I hope it will happen in my lifetime. I've got maybe 30 years left, so I'm hoping we'll be able to do it. And then we'll have an idea of there is other forms of life out there. I mean, I genuinely think that's probable. Will we actually find something that has sort of like industrial signatures and things like that? I don't think so. I think we'll find evidence of life on other planets that's essentially single-cell bacteria over a whole planetary environment.
Right. Okay, fair enough. 902-405-6000. Give us a call if you'd like to chat with Rob Thacker. Again, 902-405-6000. The Science Files continues when we come back. All right, it's the Science Files with Rob Thacker, St. Mary's University astrophysicist here in studio. Give us a call if you'd like to chat with Rob Thacker. Again, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Do some people assume because you're an astrophysicist and that's your sphere that you should inherently believe in extraterrestrials and alien life and all that? Do some people feel as though there should be a connection there?
I don't know. I think people tend to have respect for the answer that I give about it. I don't necessarily think people are going to assume that I'm going to be sort of like listening for aliens.
Yeah.
Right? So whenever we have a conversation about it, it will be the case that sometimes I get people who strongly believe in something or another, and then when they they see me as the enemy. And that's kind of a bit frustrating because I'm always quite careful and quite respectful of people's views on things. And so I've done stuff on CBC when they literally sort of invited people to call in, and I'm like, there I am, the scientist, and there are people who are seriously believe they've been through an experience of some kind, and I totally believe that they do believe that. It's just that I have to say it's just eyewitness evidence, which is a very low bar, right, for something like this. So those kind of situations can be quite difficult, but I try to be as upfront as I can. And the other thing I will sort of like avoid situations with someone who's like read every single thing about every possible visitation experience and knows everything back to front, because you're just going to look like an idiot compared to someone who's got all of these different stories that they can bring to the table. Because I'm just going to say, well, this is the bar for where the evidence is for that story. This is the bar for where the evidence is for that story, and people are going to get pretty bored pretty quick, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's fun, but one of the things that we've done on the show quite consistently, and it's great when people call in about it, is just to talk about the rare earth hypothesis and say that, in fact, what we have on this incredible planet may actually be quite rare, right? And I am, in some sense, an environmentalist. I'm married to someone who works in environmental science. I've written papers on environmental issues with my partner as well. So I do take the environment as a very serious thing because it basically makes our lives possible. Right, and I think we sometimes forget that. We tend to think of it as in our service, which is not how I think we should think about it. But that is a pretty incredible thing that we are lucky to have. I mean, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be here. And so that places responsibility on our shoulders, I think. And perhaps we've kind of lost sight of that to a certain extent because we live in a system that allows us to be or imagine that we are independent of other things when in fact we are not. No. Right? So and that's really the challenge that we have for human society going forward, I think.
We're all really just colliding with a bunch of other... Yep. What, atoms? Is that what it is? Or molecules? What's going on?
So, I mean, but it's not even that. I'd go further and say it's about the systems of interaction that we built between ourselves, right? And I don't have any particular axe to grind with any social system. I think if you look at all the social systems humans have proposed, they all have drawbacks in one way or another. But we've created a system that leads us to believe we have all of these freedoms and no serious responsibilities in some sense other than those that are put upon us by law. And that's not the reality of the world that we live on, right? That in fact, the stuff that we put into the atmosphere merges with the stuff that everyone else puts into the atmosphere. And all of these things really, we tend to see them as far away, but they're actually impacting us on a daily basis. So I think we've got to come to terms with that as a society, and we're struggling with that a bit.
Fair enough. All right, give us a call. We get Rob Thacker for another half hour. Get some room for you as well. 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. For the Science Files, again, 902-405-6000. Science Files continues when we come back. All right, it's the Science Files with Rob Thacker. Give us a call at 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. We get some open lines for you folks. If you'd like to chat with Rob, if you'd like to pick his brain, give us a call at 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Here's an email question. This one from Mark says, wondering what your thoughts are on black hole cosmology. The theory that our universe could actually be inside a black hole created from the singularity of that black hole and not from a Big Bang?
I can't. Some of these things are really difficult for me to take seriously. And the answer is you can, if you imagine a space-time that's big enough, then you can pretty much put whatever you want on the edge of that space-time, and it doesn't really matter to the universe that we see, right? And that, for me, is kind of the issue with black hole cosmology, that you can talk about things on an enormous scale, right? And we'll never really be able to perceive the truth of that. And I think that, for me, is the kind of challenge with these kind of theories. We have a similar thing with certain types of what I call inflationary theory. The inflationary theory is this idea that very, very early on in the evolution of the universe, there was suddenly an incredible period of rapid expansion that lasted a very tiny amount of time, but it was just incredibly rapid. And that may actually have been going on in a sort of like series of nested events going back in time, right? That's called eternal inflation. And it's a very interesting idea, but there's no way for us to really verify that. There's a possibility in maybe hundreds of years that we could build gravitational wave detectors that would detect the waves, gravitational waves coming from very early on after the Big Bang. If we could do that, we could actually discover a lot more about what's going on. But that is, like I said, that's hundreds of years away. That's beyond what we can do right now.
Okay, 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us for the Science Files. Again, 902-405-6000. Back to the kind of the human experience, and we were talking about language and some other nuances of the human experience. What are your thoughts on good versus evil, if you have any? Is there? Why does this concept exist, I suppose, and what do you think gives people certain proclivities towards either?
Those are very detailed questions that have preoccupied people for many decades. So I'll give you my personal take, and I don't sort of like think this is necessarily accurate or whatever. It's about how I view things, and I find the good person, bad person labels to be really quite unhelpful at times. That people are people, and they're capable of doing things that we quote unquote think of as good, and also that we think of as bad. And there are some people who generally are what I call pro-social, who believe in social interactions and value the people around them, and who tend to do things that we would call, quote-unquote, good, right? And so those people get this label, and for better or worse, they're known as someone who is an agent of doing these particular things and making a difference and so on. And then there are other people who may not necessarily do things that impact other people in a negative way, but don't do things for other people very often, and they tend to be labeled as quote unquote selfish, right? And for some people that would be equated with being a bad person, right? And for me, I don't like that because I find labels are unhelpful, and once people get a label upon them, then it can be very difficult for them to get away from that. And on top of that, the label about an individual is often going to go around much faster than their actual actions, right? So for me personally, I find the labels someone's a good person, someone's a bad person to be really not helpful. And I try to encourage people just to be aware that sometimes people who have those labels may do things that are quite contrary to those labels. Right, so I genuinely think that would help people on a day-to-day basis to relate to other people as well if we didn't have those labels quite as much.
Do you think that that people are predisposed, I guess, to certain behavior based on kind of the chemistry of the brain and the wiring of the brain and perhaps environmental background as well?
So there's a big debate about let's talk about psychopathy in evolutionary biology. Would that be in one way or another, if you had very pro-social groups, would psychopathy, where you're focused on individual, you're not empathic, and you will do things that exploit others and so on without really having too much to worry about, you will present yourself in ways that are not reflective of what you'll do? It's an interesting question, but I'm kind of curious as to how you actually go about proving that, because it's not like you can trace this to a particular blood marker or something like that. It's more complicated than that. There's a bunch of behaviors. Are they selected for under certain circumstances? It's an interesting idea, but I don't know enough about it to know how you do research on that in a conclusive way, right? So So nonetheless, people have studied societies for a very long time, and there is a sort of percentage of society that, for better or worse, tends to show what we will call deviant behaviors, right? Things that are not in the norm, and that can be crime, that can be other things. It can be very high risk-taking, for example, right? And so some of those proclivities can be actually helpful, and some of them can be highly unhelpful, right? But there is nonetheless a lot of literature that shows that you take a group of people, you're going to have these people who deviate from the norm. That's all there is to it.
I guess the concept of free agency and choice that we have, but I'm not. It's easier for some people, it seems, to make the good choices than others, and I'm not sure that is again why that is.
I have to be honest and say I strongly feel that there is a heavy element of socialization and nurture in people's personalities. I mean, there's obvious examples of twin studies and so on where you can look at that and try and sort of figure those things out. But certainly there's a pretty reasonable amount of evidence that if you have strong role models, right, you will pick that behaviors up, right? I mean, this is even true for resilience. Right, there have been studies done in Brazil, and this might be a bit of a surprise to people, but the studies done in Brazil of families who are Holocaust survivors have moved to Brazil, and that shows that families that have what we'll generally call coping mechanisms, and believe it or not, one of those coping mechanisms is using dark humor to laugh at a situation to try and take its emotional impact away, and so most of the families that have that type of behavior talk about it and not necessarily make light of these things, but use humor as a way to take the edge off. They actually have, in general, strongly resilient family relationships. Whereas there's also, on the other side, a fair amount of evidence that the families for which they're still living through the trauma and they're unable to talk about it and process things end up having situations in which it's difficult for people to understand and develop their own sense of resilience, right? And I found that really amazing. I was talking to a psychologist about this, and they're like, there is something to be said for having open discussions, but not to the point where, and this is where it gets tricky, right, that you actually talk about it and you give your trauma as a contagion almost to other people. You can do that through ruminating about things too much, right? That there's value in talking about things and going to resolution, but if you talk about things consistently and you don't resolve it, you can actually pull people into your own rumination, which is a problem. It's known that mental health issues can be contagious to a certain extent.
902-405-6000, that's the way to reach us for the Science Files. Again, 902-405-6000. Not to belabor the point, but I will. I've known families, for instance, that were religious and had large families, and let's say 7 of the 8 kids or 6 of the 8 kids fell in line and went to church and bought in, and then 2 of them just said hell with this and blazed their own trail.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting, that's all, because again, you mentioned the nurturing and all that would have been very similar for all of them.
But you never know.
Yeah.
You never know, because I mean it can be a simple thing. Like I can think of one of the most significant things in growing up, and a lot of people, I mean, I don't mind sharing this. A lot of people are going to think, really, that's the thing? And I'm like, yeah. So when I was a kid, I would go to the local store regularly, buy sweets and whatever, after school and so on. And one day I did that, and I went there, I did my same usual thing, paid for them, walked to the exit, tried to open it, and it wouldn't open. And there was a whole bunch of people behind me, the checkouts, bunch of adults and so on. And so the person on the checkout said, well, try the other door. And so I walked across the store to the other entrance door, and everyone started laughing at me. And she said, no, the door to the left of the other door. And so, but I was so upset as a small kid of all of these adults laughing at me really loudly that I never went back to that store.
Sure.
Right? And that really changed my personality in one sort of like event that lasted a few seconds. I suddenly became really shy And I didn't want to go and back to that store because before that I'd been like the leader of the pack. I was really well known in the neighborhood and so on, right? Even as a really young kid, right? And suddenly I was like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that, right? And I became very shy very quickly, right? And that one event, right, really changed my personality.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. 902-405-6000. Let's go back to the phones. David, hello.
Hi. I have an interesting question. I went to St. Mary's and I studied philosophy there, and I took a course from Professor Grennan called Basic Logic.
Okay.
And that, I don't know if you remember Professor Grennan, but...
Not off the top of my head, but anyway.
It was one of the most important courses I ever took, and it was just basically the basic rules of an argument.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't overly complex or anything like that, but, all the bad ad hominem, all the logical fallacies.
The logical fallacies, yep.
Right. And so, given the rise and the dangerous rhetoric that's coming out of the States, my daughter is just going into grade 12, and they've never studied anything like that in high school. I was talking to her about it. And the question is, would you be in favor of a high school course that is kind of dedicated to reasonable, rational thought as a precursor to higher education?
In short, yes. So, but I will say that there's been... let me talk about where I think that this is actually more important than even what you're talking about right now. And so that is manipulation of people. And so when you look at what marketing does now, marketing has literally turned into applied psychology, right? So we are weaponizing the science of psychology against people, right? And so there have been experiments of trying to make school children aware of these manipulations. But as far as I'm aware, that's not become standard discussions, right? We did a little bit in my generation in what's called media class. We would talk about how people talk about that. But that, I think, is even more important now. And I'm not sure. I don't want to say I know, because it may be there are some places that do take a lot of time talking about these things. But that, I think, is at least as important as to how to frame an argument. And the other thing is that what's becoming really, really significant right now in this age of mis and disinformation is what we call the liar's dividend. That once the world becomes a place in which people really aren't sure where to go, where to get the truth, then literally anyone who is prepared to throw falsehoods out without thinking about it is in a situation where they can do that without consequence. And that is a very dangerous place for democracy and society.
Sure, I agree 100%. So, anyway, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, David, take care. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us for the Science Files with Rob Thacker. We got the Dr. Thacker to the top of the hour. We'll get some room for you as well. 902-405-6000. The Science Files continues when we come back. All right, the Science Files continues with Rob Thacker. If you'd like to sneak in a question or comment, you can do so. We've got Rob for another 7 or 8 minutes. 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Why don't we touch on a couple or one of these stories that you sent along, Rob?
Sure.
Why don't you pick one out that you think is kind of more interesting than the other three?
You want to talk about the rivers? Because I think that's kind of cool.
That's
right?
pretty interesting.
Yeah,
quite topical as well.
So there's been this long-standing issue in understanding how rivers form and how they change their flow and shape, of why we have some rivers that stay as a single pathway and why we get other ones that suddenly start dividing into sort of like multiple interwoven threads. They don't necessarily have to go all over the place. Most of the time you'll be in a sort of like water catchment, as we call it, so they won't be able to go over hills and things like that. But there'll be this situation where they suddenly start diverging and so on. And so this has been, I'm surprised it's been this really big thing, but it has been a really big thing in geography for some time. And so there's new research. This is published in Science, so this is a pretty significant journal, that turns out that the difference between forming multiple channels versus staying in a single channel is literally about the rate of erosion of the riverbanks, right? As stuff sort of like falls into the river, you get sediment going to the river. Where does that go? right? So here's the sort of general, very simple understanding of it. It's obviously a little bit more complicated than this, but this is a general way they're explaining it. So if stuff falls in from a riverbank, right, you have erosion and then gets moved and then deposited on another side of the riverbank, then that system is mainly going to stay as a single channel, right? If, on the other hand, stuff erodes from the riverbank and then doesn't get deposited on the edges, in fact, get deposited on the bottom of the river, then you can start forming things like sandbanks. And if you start forming sandbanks, then the distance from there to actually forming separate channels is not very far. And so that's generally what the theory is now, that it's literally the rate at which stuff comes off the riverbanks and gets deposited on them, or does it get deposited into the channels themselves, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
John, hello.
Hi, Todd. Dr. Rob, I got a doozy question for you.
Okay.
The periodic table was developed by Mr. Mendeleev 150 years ago.
Okay.
And he used, I guess, the atomic number, not the atomic weight. And he was able to get all our elements in the table. My question is the periodic table the same throughout the universe? If we have another civilization, let's say Antaurus, whatever,
yeah,
would they have the same periodic table as we do? And if they didn't, obviously there'd be some elements that are missing.
So, okay, so
Can you elaborate? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to try and be very careful about this. So there are some things within the periodic table that are obviously very specific. And so let me take the noble gases, right? So those all have a very specific form and very specific chemistries, right? And those particular objects are going to be the same everywhere in the universe, right? Where it gets slightly more sophisticated, there's been a little bit of debate over the years of whether you can slightly reorganize the periodic table to better explain certain things and other things and so on. And I think that, yeah, you might get slight differences between societies, but essentially the chemical properties of certain families being similar, that's true whether you have those elements on the Earth, whether you have those elements on Alpha Centauri, wherever you go. Right? So as long as a society has an understanding of chemistry, then I think the answer is they're going to come up with something similar to the periodic table. They might do some slight subtle differences with the actinides and so on, but most of it's going to look pretty similar.
Can I just follow up a little bit on that, Dr. Rob?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So quickly, let me think now. Okay. So they say the planets, the universes were all made by asteroids, comets, smashing together. So go ahead a billion years and we had volcanoes. Well, a lot of our elements come from volcanoes, like gold, right? That's spit out from the center of the Earth, whatever. So is it possible if there's volcanoes in other planets that there would be gold as an example there? And I'll just hang up and thank you, Rob.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Rob and Todd.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so well, I know what you're saying, and that there's probably an element of truth that, yes, there is gold down in magma and so on. Gold can also be brought to the Earth in meteorites and things like that. That's a possibility as well. Gold is really produced in supernovae explosions, right? So there's funnily enough, there's quite a lot of it out in space, but it's very low density, right, because space is so big. So the long and the short of it is, yes, if there are other planets in the universe out there that have a very similar kind of what we call planetary differentiation, that's planetary structure, and if they have a similar format so that they have been formed by the same processes, generically, this idea that you form planets like the Earth through collisions and slow build-up over time of asteroids and so on, that process we have quite a lot of evidence for is happening in other stellar systems as well, right? So that's actually pretty well understood, I would say. What could be different is the overall compositions of the actual elements and what we call the atomic ratios. There's probably a reasonable amount of evidence that those can be a little bit different in different parts of a galaxy because you have different types of stars that are more common in certain types of the galaxy than others, right? And I think that's the sort of subtle difference. There's a possibility that you could have planets that had enormous amounts of carbon, for example, right? And so It's a really interesting question, and it is something that people who work on planet formation are actively looking at. But there's so many inputs, there's so many different chemical elements you can think about. It's actually quite a difficult idea to actually come up with a comprehensive theory about.
Rob, great stuff. Thanks for doing this, my friend. Appreciate it.
And I want to say thanks to everyone for calling in this week. I really had some great questions, and it's really been fun, a fun hour.
Great stuff. Rob Thacker, the Science Files, astrophysicist from St. Mary's University. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks to Vanessa Veinotte as well on the other side of the glass at the control boards, doing a fine job as always. We're back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. See you then.